Hello people, today we are going to talk about the legendary battle vehicle of the British Army, the most mass-produced British tank and the legend of the Second World War battlefields. Meet Cromwell tank. Cromwell appeared thanks to a competition announced by the British General Staff at the end of 1940. Beginning of 1941 for a heavy cruising tank. The light and fast cruising tanks then in service with the British Army were designed to meet the traditional missions that cavalry had always faced, building on the success achieved in battle and pursuing the enemy, and didn't meet the two most important requirements of modern combat: the presence of a reliable armor and high firepower. In accordance with the conditions put forward by the General Staff in 1941, the new cruiser tank was to have a combat weight of about 25 tons, frontal armor about 70 mm thick and a 6-pound gun in the turret. The prototype of such a tank, literally from the very first day of work, received the designation A24 and the name Cromwell. It was developed by the Newfield Company, being an improved version of the Crusader cruising tank. It inherited from it the transmission and engine, the Liberty engine, which, as it quickly became clear, turned out to be unable to ensure the normal operation of a tank weighing about 27 tons. Soon renamed the Cavalier, this unsuccessful machine began to be used for training purposes, as well as to perform some specific tasks. However, every cloud has a silver lining, and Cavalier taught a good lesson to customers of armored vehicles. After it, not a single tank was ordered or accepted on the basis of drawings without first passing comprehensive tests, and the test program was very extensive, and its requirements were extremely strict. At the beginning of 1941, the two companies, Leyland and Rolls-Royce, actively collaborated in the development of a new tank engine, and finally offered the tank builders the Meteor engine, a modified Merlin aircraft engine. Meteor developed power up to 600 horsepower, more than enough for heavy cruising tanks, and since its development was very successful, the endurance and reliability of a new engine didn't raise any doubts. The Leyland Company began work on a tank that was called the Centaur, but was essentially a Cromwell with a Liberty engine. And since at the start of production of the Centaur tanks, there was not a single ready-made Meteor engine. The first vehicles were equipped with Liberty, old Liberty engines, and were not much better than the ill-fated Cavalier. One characteristic detail should be noted: the engine compartment of the Centaur tanks was designed for a new engine, and when the Meteor was finally ready, most of the tanks after 1943 underwent conversion. Instead of the old Liberty, they received the more powerful Meteors, but without waiting for a new engine, the Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company on its own initiative developed the latest version of the Cromwell. The first prototype appeared in January 1942. At first, the designation of the tank was somewhat confusing, since it was called both A27M M after the name of the Meteor engine, and Cromwell M or Cromwell 3. However, these problems ended when the designation of the Centaur and Cavalier tanks were officially adopted. Given the previous failures were the result of superficial tests, the Cromwell was subjected to a whole series of rigorous tests and a real luxury for wartime. So the first production vehicles appeared only in January 1943. There were practically no problems with the Meteor engine, and this quite eloquently indicates that special attention was paid to the engine when designing the tank. Rolls-Royce itself manufactured the first series of engines in order to be ready at any time for anything unexpected. However, the leadership of the military department decided to transfer the production of Meteors to subcontracting companies and thereby free Rolls-Royce for further work on aircraft engines. By the time the first Cromwells appeared, the General Staff had changed its policy regarding the armament of tanks. Previously, it was believed that a 10-gun was intended to fight enemy armored vehicles, but combat experience gained during the war in North African desert showed that the main targets were not tanks at all, but dug-in infantry and anti-tank artillery. During this period, the need was felt not so much for a gun that fired armor-piercing shells, but for a gun capable of hitting less protected targets with high-power, high-explosive charges. The American Sherman and Grant tanks armed with 75mm cannons met these requirements, so a proposal was made to equip British tanks with the same guns. The development of the 75mm gun caused new delays in the implementation of the Cromwell tank production program, as well as the re-equipment of serial tanks that left the factory workshop with the 6-pounder gun. The first 75mm guns entered service at the end of 1943, but at that time they were already obsolete, which however didn't prevent them from serving until the end of the war. The new gun was an improved model of the 6-pounder gun, from which it borrowed a number of components and parts. The barrel remained the same but was bored out, shortened and equipped with a muzzle brake. The bolt mechanism was no different from those on previous models. All this explains the presence of many defects, which were completely eliminated only by May 1944. In addition to the 75mm gun, the Cromwell was armed with 2 Besa machine guns, one of which was coaxial with the cannon, and the second was installed in the front plate of the tank's hull, the last reminder of the tank doctrine of the First World War, when the tank hulls had so many machine gun barrels around. In accordance with the traditions of English tank building, the Cromwell's hull was divided into 3 sections, and its armor was made of forged or reverted armor plates. In the front compartment there were a driver and a machine gunner. They were separated from the fighting compartment by a partition with a hedge. The tank commander, gunner and loader were located in a rotating turret. The gunner was on the left in front of the commander, and the loader was on the right. The hydraulically driven turret rotated 360 degrees in 15 seconds and made it possible to target the targets with high accuracy. The first modification of the Cromwell could offer the tank commander 2 panoramic periscopes at his disposal. On subsequent versions there were already 8, which provided full all-around visibility. The ammunition consisted of 23 shells that were located in the turret, 41 rounds in ammunition racks located along the walls of the fighting compartment, and almost 5,000 rounds for machine guns. The radio station was installed in the rear of the turret behind the loader, who served as a radio operator and was constantly in touch. The engine was housed in the power compartment between two fuel tanks and two large air filters. Behind the engine there were vertically mounted radiators of the cooling system. Maintenance was quite simple, and the reliability of major engines was a real gift for mechanics who had to endure all the vagaries of worn-out Liberty engines. However, in a number of cases, the crew, and especially the driver and machine gunner, had to deal with problems that arose during an emergency exit from the vehicle. On subsequent modifications, side hatches were so that both tankers could get out of the tank in any position of the turret and gun. But the installation of these hatches led to a decrease in free spaces on the fender shelves, and only a small box behind the turret was left for storing tools and spare parts. Throughout 1943 and the beginning of 1944, the Cromwells were used for training purposes and first entered combat during the landing of Anglo-American troops in Normandy. Tanks of this time formed the basis of the combat equipment of the 7th Tank Division. Compared to German tanks of that period, the Cromwell looked quite tolerable. The armor of the tank was comparable to the German T4. The weapons were worse, but in battle both tanks were capable of destroying each other. Moreover, the Cromwell had a huge advantage in speed, 50% faster than the Germans. The Panther, which appeared in 1943, was in different weight category and weighed 15 tons, more than the Cromwell. Panther had significantly more powerful frontal armor and much more powerful weapons. Surprisingly, the Cromwell's side armor was either equal to or thicker than the Panther's side armor, although the Cromwell had a great advantage in speed and reliability. Attempts were made to increase the Cromwell's armor by welding on armor plates. This increased the frontal armor to more than 100 mm. However, it was subsequently accepted that installing additional protection didn't provide any benefit. After the Cayenne breakthrough, the Cromwells were able to perform the tasks for which they were created. To develop the success they had achieved, supported by CS tanks armed with 95 mm howitzers, the Cromwell squadrons prevailed over the heavier German tanks thanks to their speed and maneuverability. As for firepower, the British tanks still could not compete with the German vehicles. All attempts to install a 17-pounder cannon on the Cromwell ended in failure, so the crews had to rely only on themselves and on the maneuverability of their vehicles. Attempts to install a 17-pounder gun in the Cromwell turret ended, however, with the creation of the Challenger Tank A30. The first model, which appeared in 1942, resembled the Cromwell, somewhat lengthened due to the additional road wheel. The test results of the new tank were not very encouraging. The hull turned out to be too narrow for a large diameter turret, and the increase in weight and length of the chassis led to a loss of speed and agility. Nevertheless, the Challenger was put into service, and at the beginning of 1943, 260 vehicles of this type left the plant's workshops. During the Second World War, the Cromwell was the most widely used English cruiser tank, and without having the status of a main battle tank together with the Shermans, it was in service with all armored units of Great Britain. Now we can surely call it legendary tank of the Second World War, which creation changed the path of the war and gave us the better world as it is now.